Good morning. It is the 2nd of September. Wow. It really does seem like only the other day that I was planning out what I was going to be sowing for spring and getting everything ready and really excited. And I'm just going to run through some of the things that I'm planning to sow in September. Some of them are going to be for spring next year, so stuff which will just go outside and stay outside and be ready for spring. Some of the things are going to be grown in the polytunnel, either for overwinter harvesting or for early spring harvesting, you know, like January, February time. And some of the bits are like a last ditch attempt, so we'll be getting baby veg from them rather than the full grown veg, but outdoors. So there's actually a surprising amount of stuff that can be sown in September. Starting with the things which are just going to be kind of sown and then left outside ready for spring next year. The main one is cabbages. So classic spring cabbages tend to get sown about now, kind of end of August, early September tends to be the time to sow them. And then they will be ready for harvesting around kind of April, May, which is always a handy time to be picking stuff because it's right when the end of the winter things kind of start tailing off, and then you don't have a lot until kind of June. So these are excellent for filling up that little empty space that we have really early in the year. Another brassica that I got in last month, so in August, I sowed some more Cavallonero, which are going to be the ones which I will plant out kind of mid-October, and they're just going to stay in the ground ready for next spring. But I'm going to sow some more kale in general, so there'll be a bit of Cavallonero, there will be a bit of the scarlet red kale, a bit of curly kale. I'll sow them in September and then use them for baby leaves. Like, I won't let them get to kind of big proper veg size because it's a little bit late in the year for that where I am. So I'm going to sow a load of them, and I'll sow them quite thickly. I won't give them, you know, like 30 centimeters apart like I would for the big boys. Just kind of sprinkle them around and then harvest them for salad and kind of baby veg, that sort of thing. And they'll be harvestable all the way up to the weather gets really cold. So that's what I'm going to do with those. Yeah, so I have almost like a cut and come again kind of salad mix, but it will be baby kale. There's quite a lot of things which kind of fall into that category of giving you kind of fresh greenery for the winter, like picking the baby kales. I'm also going to be planting some spinach, some like proper spinach. So as you know, you will have heard the two varieties over and over again. I sow Mediana and Monopa. They are proper spinach, but I'll be sowing these to eat raw in salads, you know, just with the baby leaves. It's a bit late to get them to grow really into big kind of substantial plants now. Last year I tried growing them in the polytunnel. I planted them kind of late September and tried to get them going in the polytunnel, and it really didn't work. The only one that did work was one that was called Americana, which is it is a spinach, but it's got these kind of weird hollow stems and it's really chunky. So that one did work, but I don't have any seed for that. So I'm going to try and get hold of some of that. I'll put a link underneath. So I will try and grow that one for kind of big spinach over winter, but in terms of baby spinach, I'll be doing both of these. I'm going to sow them in seed trays, and then I will split them between half I'll plant outside and half I'll stick in the polytunnel or the covered bed. I'm not sure which yet, but I'll do one or the other. Mainly because I don't know how the rest of the season is going to go, and that's the same with a lot of these things. I will be putting some outdoors and some indoors because it's perfectly possible, says Optimismo, it's possible that we're going to end up with a really warm autumn. So some of these things could be perfectly fine. If our temperatures just start plummeting from now and we just descend into winter from this point on, they won't have much of a chance outdoors. But I'm kind of hedging my bets on both sides because the year's been so weird so far. You just don't know. So yeah, classic spinach I'm going to sow into trays. They're going to go half in the beds, half in the polytunnel, and we'll see how we go with that. On the spinach theme, I will also be sowing some more chard. What an enormous surprise. But last week, if you watched my vlog on Tuesday, you saw that I was planting out quite a lot of chard that I sowed in early August, and it was all ready to go out. So they're the last of the ones which I'm going to be putting outside because they need a bit of time to kind of really bulk up to then survive the winter. Obviously chard is super tough and it will survive the winter without any problems, but it needs to have got to the point where it's a really quite substantial plant before it's going to survive the winter. So I am still going to sow some in September, probably late September, and they will be being planted into the covered bed. So the main growing areas that we've got that we're going to be using as covered areas are the greenhouse, the polytunnel. We've got a big cover that goes completely over one of the raised beds. We're also going to cover one of the small beds. So that's kind of the area that we're growing in. And I'll be putting some chard into one of those areas. I'm not sure which one yet. Last year, I don't know if you remember, I had some absolutely whopping Ford Hook Giant chard that had grown in the polytunnel. The chard worked really well in the polytunnel because of the humidity. It didn't rot out. It was such a strong plant, it didn't rot away, whereas lettuces and things didn't work in there. So I'm going to go chard again in the polytunnel, Ford Hook Giant in particular, but I'm going to try and get them started slightly earlier this year because like this one that we had that was doing really fantastically, it came too late. I planted them out in there too late from a run over from tomatoes because they did so fantastically last year. I didn't want to take them out. Unfortunately, I assure you that is not the case this year. So the tomatoes will be coming out in plenty of time, unfortunately, but maybe fortunately. So we should be more on time with the winter crops this year, and the chard being one of them. In the little covered bed that we're doing is the new carrot bed that I put together in last week's vlog as well. We sifted all the soil into it, so it's going to be just for carrots, and it is a little bit late to be sowing carrots now, but we're going to cover that. So it's essentially going to be like sowing them in a polytunnel. So if you've got space in your polytunnel, you can grow carrots from now, and they should be okay. Obviously depending on the weather that we're going to get, but that's something that we just can't predict. But they should be all right. It's not too late for an indoor sowing of carrots. So in a big bucket in a greenhouse or in a polytunnel or something like that, they should be fine. I mentioned last week that the two carrots that I'm sticking with at the moment are Touchon, which is my all-time favourite orange carrot. And I'm also doing a yellow carrot, which is called Jaune Obtuse. Both of them are from real seeds. I'll put the link underneath. As with all the seeds that I'm mentioning today, I will put a link underneath to where I got them from. Another root vegetable, turnips. Strictly speaking, it's not too late to be sowing turnips outside. I'm going to be doing one row of each of Trovsky, which is a yellow turnip, purple top Milan, which is unsurprisingly purple topped, and also Snowball, which is just the classic white one. I'll be doing a row each of them straight out into a bed. I'll also be doing a row each of them into the bed, which will later get covered. One of the advantages that the covered raised bed has over the polytunnel, even though it's covered with the same plastic, is that I can get things started now. So if we do get a really warm autumn, the polytunnel will just get really hot. Like it's a really warm environment anyway, and it's already going to be covered. Whereas I can start these off outdoors now, and then just when the weather starts to turn, that's when I can cover them over. So I've got a little bit more flexibility with them. So that's where my turnips are going to go. The outdoor turnips won't form massive fat turnips. You'll be sowing them more for sort of you know, baby turnips, golf ball size turnips, that sort of thing, rather than them having the time to kind of get really big, like say a midsummer sowing would have had. They just don't have time. So the ones outside will be for baby sowings. The ones that are going in the covered bed will be for slightly larger. Last year, the ones that I sowed into the covered bed really didn't produce much in the way of turnips at all, as in like the base bit. But what they did produce was really phenomenal, strong turnip tops and beautiful thick-stemmed flowers, which are essentially Chima rapa, which is a turnip top, but grown specifically for the tops. They never form bottoms. So really, it's a win-win situation with the turnips. If they give you turnips, marvellous. If they don't give you turnips and they give you flowers instead, also marvellous. So that's what I'm doing with the turnips. I will also be sowing the Chima rapa like intentionally. That will be being grown outdoors. Last month I sowed the 120-day one, which was pushing it a little bit. It's going to be over winter, but Chima rapa is really interesting in that the varieties are named after the amount of time that they take to be harvestable. So you've got 40-day, 60-day, 90-day, 120-day, that kind of thing. I've just direct sown some 120-day straight into the bed. I sowed some 60-day a while back. We've had 3 pickings off it and it's just coming to an end. I'm going to harvest what's left of that, rip all of that out, and then sow a 40-day straight into that space, just so I can kind of cram a little bit extra in. But Chima rapa is one of my favourite vegetables. The other day I made a traditionally a Greek kind of phyllo pie with feta that's made with spinach. I made it with masses of Chima rapa the other day, and I can tell you it was yeah. When I get the next harvest of Chima rapa, that's going to be one of the recipes on here because it was blinding. And it's one of those pies that you can kind of make with so many different leafy greens. You could make it with chard, Chima rapa, you could do it with just the plain turnip tops. So it's pretty flexible. So I'm going to put that as one of the recipes on here later in the month when we've got a bit more to pick. But yeah, so Chima rapa, that's going to be outside, not undercover at all. Something else that's just going to be sown direct outdoors is the corn salad. I'm going to be just sowing it straight into the ground and letting it come up and eating what you can from it. It doesn't get very tall. I don't know if you know corn salad, it only gets to about sort of this sort of height maximum. You just keep pinching out the centre of the rosettes of the leaves. Some people think it tastes of absolutely nothing at all. That includes Mum in that camp. She just can't see the point of it. I really like it. So I'm going to be sowing it. I just take up, you know, like a strip of one bed and broad sow it straight into there. I'm going to sow it direct into the bed. See how that goes depending on the weather that we've got. I might sow a bit later on. September sowing, just straight outside. Another thing I'm going to be growing outside is mustard. So I've got Fab Green Wave one, which I've never tried before, quite looking forward to that. And some Drangons Tongue mustard, which I sowed some about 2 months ago, and I recently planted it out into one of the beds and it's looking really, really strong. So I'm hoping that if I sow another lot now, I'll be able to kind of continue that forward. I haven't tried the Green Wave yet, so I'm pretty excited about that, but the Drangons Tongue's gorgeous. It's also not too late to throw in some radishes. I had masses of packets of radish right at the beginning of the year, and slowly we've just kind of eat them down. So I've just got some cherry bell and a bit of French breakfast left over, so I will sow them sometime this month, probably in 2 waves. And they're so quick. I mean, there's still plenty of time. Even at the end of September, you could be sowing radishes and get them before we have any problems with the cold. Again, a bit like the turnips, you can't go wrong. If they don't form proper radishes on the bottom, you can wait for them to flower, and the seed pods are just as good. Plus you get about 30 for each seed rather than just 1, which is pretty good. Earlier in the year, 1 whole strip I just let go to seed, even though they were forming radishes, because, do you know, I think I prefer the seed pods to the radishes themselves. Also, I've had a problem with my tooth, and crunching through like a raw radish has been a bit tricky, but the seed pods, no problem, same flavour. Right, what else have we got? Cress. So not like the cress that you grow in the top of an egg cup and then paint a face on it. This is things like land cress. So I've got 3 different types of cress that I grow, which I'll just direct sow straight outside, just like bog standard land cress. I've got one called Grandpa's cress, and I also have one that is called Iranian cress, which came from a guy up here called Hadda, who is Lily's dad, Lily the cat, if you don't watch the vlogs. This produces a really lovely peppery leaf to put into salads and that sort of thing, and you tend to just broad sow it rather than in lines, just broadcast it, and then as it comes up, once it's to a good size, you just cut the whole lot off, harvest the whole lot and wait for it to regrow and then harvest again. A bit like rocket, which you can also sow now. So some people with a rocket plant, they'll just keep picking off the leaves as they go. I tend to harvest it like cress, where you just chop the whole lot off and let it regrow, and that way you don't tend to get the really hard stalks, and you just get like one really big beautiful bunch of rocket leaf that you don't have to sort through and you don't have to pick through and all the rest of it. So yeah, like I say, rocket is another thing that you can sow now. I've been growing 3 different types of rocket this year. A broadleaf one, which was this one, the standard spindly one, and also one that was supposed to have a red vein in it. Another Dragon's Tongue. Dragon's Tongue is a really like popular name for these things. Anything with a red stripe down the centre. Do we think Dragon's Tongues have red stripes? But yeah, this one, I wasn't actually that impressed with this. I didn't think it had a red stem at all. It was just slightly darker in colour than the normal rocket, where it's normally quite white with the green leaf. It was just like off-white. I wouldn't say it merited the term Dragon's Tongue. I'll probably stick some, just sprinkle it straight into a pot and bung it in the greenhouse as well, because you can't really have too much of it. We're going to have a lot of space in the greenhouse coming up very soon, because everything looks really sad in there. The peppers, the chilies, the cucumbers, the melons. No melons. And the weather outside at the moment, it's totally grey. Looks like nothing's going to really ripen in there. So I'm going to be clearing a lot of stuff out of there at the end of September, in which case I should have a lot of space for things like this. Okay, lettuces. There are quite a few lettuces like Winter Density and Arctic King that you can sow now and grow outside, and they'll grow really quite happily through pretty bleak winters, or as bleak as the winters get here anyway, and they'll be absolutely fine. The only problem I've got with them is that I don't think they've got the best flavour. Having said that, when there's nothing else growing, you're pretty grateful for them, so I will throw a couple of them in. They do form a really good looking lettuce, and that can really lift your spirits in the middle of winter when everything else is looking really sad apart from some kale. Having a good looking lettuce still growing on the plot does help psychologically. There's also one that's called All Year Round. Again, not a massive fan of the flavour, but it's a great lettuce in terms of it just being able to survive quite a lot of pants weather. So I'll be putting some of those in. I am going to try growing some in the greenhouse. I won't be trying them in the polytunnel. I don't know if you remember last year, all of my lettuces rotted out that I tried growing in the polytunnel because of humidity. I'm going to be growing them in the greenhouse this year, which is a much drier environment, even though it's still like protected temperature wise. I'm going to be trying this Webb's Wonderful. When I was talking, I don't even know if it was last month, but whichever month it was when I went to town with all the lettuces, that might have been July. I was waxing lyrical about this Webb's Wonderful because it's got a little thing on it at the top there that says Britain's best loved lettuce, and I've never grown it before, and it had a rave review about how sweet and delicious and crisp it was and everything. So I sowed this along with loads of Valmain and loads of, I think I sowed about 13 different types of lettuce. In the end, we've got about 9, not 9 different types, but 9 lettuces because of the slugs. They were growing really well in the cold frame. Then they got a bit slugged, so I potted them up and was really looking after them. A couple of them, we lost them then, and then we planted the first like 15 or whatever out into the bed, the 15 biggest ones. Pretty much entirely, they just all got eaten off immediately. So then we had nothing. So then we planted a load. Well, basically we're on about our 5th load. These ones, touch wood, they look like they've got past the main danger of the slugs. But it hasn't been great, and also during all that kerfuffle they've all got a bit mixed up and I don't know what's what. I can tell the Valmain and some of the redder lettuces and like Mizuna, the ones that have got really distinctive leaf type, I can tell, but I don't think there's a single Webb's Wonderful in there, and obviously it was that good the slugs went for that one first. So I'm going to try again. I'm going to try it in the greenhouse, and I really want it. Look, doesn't it look good? I want it, so I'm going to try that. So wish me luck on that one, along with a couple of other bits and pieces for winter picking. The main one that I'll do in the greenhouse around this time is just, you know, these type things where it's just like a general mix and it's a cut and come again type thing. Nothing's going to form a proper head of lettuce, but it keeps you going late into the season. So I'll do a couple of pots of those as well. These are super quick, super easy, and as long as it's not kind of like minus temperatures in the greenhouse, they should be fine. Still plenty of time to be sowing the bitter lettuces, so things like the Endive, this is a really fantastic frizzly type one. We had this one growing last year. We started it off about September time, mid-September, and it was growing away happily all winter. You know, we had for us really heavy frosts last year, and we had the snow. It was so cold for us, like unusually cold, and this went all very sad and flat and was lying across the bed and terrible, and the moment it warmed up, picked up, was back to being perfect again. So I think this is an absolute winner of a lettuce, and we were picking the ones that we had over winter all the way into like late May, early June. They have a really white centre, which is considerably less bitter than the outside green bits. The outside green bits are a little bit, you know, but the insides are gorgeous. So basically yum. It's an Endive, so it's in the same family as the Chicory and the Radicchio and all of those kind of things. So I'm going to be sowing Radicchio as well, or standard red one I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to be doing 2 leaf chicories, which you have heard me rant and rave and wax lyrical about over the last year. They have been unbelievable. They are seriously one of my absolute favourite vegetables to have on the plot. Last year I just grew this one, which was long green. It looks like a dandelion, it tastes a little bit like a dandelion, but it cooks beautifully and it's just wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful vegetable. I loved it. We were given some plug plants last year from a lady up on the top row of these allotments. So we just bunged them in. We didn't really know what we were doing with them, and we'd never had them before. We just had them in the end of the covered bed. This year we're going to be growing some outdoors and some in the covered bed. But what was so lovely about them, not only were they delicious, you could cut them and then you would get complete reflushes of the whole plant over and over again. So they were really long lived, so you got a lot of value out of each plant. And talking of value, these were the ones with the beautiful, beautiful blue flowers. So you see chicory flowers on like the sides of motorways and everything. It's those really beautiful periwinkle blue flowers. I think they're absolutely magnificent. So that was the green one I grew last year. And I'm trying a different one as well, which is supposedly very similar, but it's just got a red stem. I'm really looking forward to those. I have got some started already. I've got some which are about this sort of size. So they will be going into the beds outdoors, and then I will sow some more kind of mid-September that will be going into the covered bed for later in the year. At this sort of time of year, I do tend to do 2 sowings of a lot of stuff because we're trying to gamble. The weather's really unpredictable at this time of year. To be fair, it's been unpredictable all year. But normally at this time of year it's really quite unpredictable, so I tend to do a lot of kind of like not putting all of my eggs in one basket and spreading things out and starting some things at the beginning of the month and some at the end, and just hope that you get something out of them. That's generally my hope for most of these things. Just something would be nice to harvest at the end of it all. It's also a really fantastic time to be sowing Pak Choi, so I'm going to be doing some Pak Choi. This is just a standard green one. I tend to sow the Chinese vegetables or the Oriental vegetables like the Pak Choi and the Mizuma and all those kind of things. You tend to sow them either really quite early in the year or late to kind of try and stop them bolting like they do right in the centre of the year when it's really hot. The one that I sowed right at the beginning of the year was also from Sow Seeds, and it was just called Red Choi, and it was magnificent. It was absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to sow these ones first, which is just the basic green one, and I'm going to pick up some more seed of the red one and sow them on in the polytunnel over winter. I've also got these 2 to try, which I'm really excited about. These were both very kindly sent to me by Ali, who met on here as a commenter. What a joy. He sent me a huge bundle of really exciting things, most of which are going to be sown in spring next year, but these 2 are going to be going in this month. So we've got a pink Mizuna. I'm going to sow them into seed trays and then transplant them, and I'll spread them between a pot or a trough in the greenhouse, straight into the beds in the polytunnel, and then into the outdoor bed outside. There's also this one which I have never grown before. Looks like it's called Chicory, but it has a very familiar look to it. Is a kind of a Chinese brassica along similar lines as all of these, and I'm really looking forward to that. So I'm going to get that in a similar fashion to this. I'll spread it out because I've never grown it before. I'm going to try it in all 3 of my kind of winter locations and see which one works best. So yum. Old favourite, spring onions. You know I've been sowing these all year round. I don't think there's been a what I'm sowing this month video this whole year where I haven't been sowing spring onions. I don't sow a lot of them. I sow like 1 row every month or so, and it just means you've got a continuous supply. This will probably be my last sowing outdoors. I'll do 1 quite early, and then right at the end of September I will put a row straight into the covered bed. That's my plan for those. This is Lilia again, my absolute favourite. I always go on about Lilia, but I just don't think it can be beaten. So what else have we got? I've done turnips, I've done lettuce, I've done cress. Oh, I know. This is about the first opportunity to be sowing overwintering Broadbeans. I'm not going to be sowing them this early. I'll do them probably end of October, but if you're in somewhere colder, or even if you just want to get them started really early, they'll start growing and then they'll sit in the ground over the whole of the winter, not really doing very much, and then they'll take off like a rocket in the spring. I'm not going to sow mine yet. Like I say, I'll give it a bit more time. Plus, I've still got stuff in the beds where I'm going to be growing them, so I don't really have an opportunity to get them in yet. The other thing that is just like Broadbeans that I'm going to be doing a lot of this year after the enormous success of them last year is the field beans, which is a green manure. We're going big on green manure again this year. We tried it for the first time like on a semi-serious scale last year. We did the field beans, we did the phacelia. Which else one? We did a ryegrass, I think. Anyway, we're going to be doing a lot more of that this year. The first lot of them are probably going to be start going in at the end of September, but I'm going to do a whole separate video on what we're doing on the green manure front later this month when I start sowing them. I'm going to talk about it because we've got lots of plans. So I'll be preaching green manure, I think, in a video later this month. I know. The last one that I'm going to be putting in, and I'll do them fairly pronto, is peas. You can get some which are really good overwintering peas, which you can get started now, and they do the same sort of thing as Broadbeans. They just sit there until spring, and then they are kind of already established by spring, so you get a really early crop. I'm not going to be growing them for that. I'm going to be growing them for pea shoots. So you can either grow them in a pot, or you can just bung them straight in the ground, and you wait for them to get this high, just nip them off, have them in a salad or cook them down or do whatever. If you're sowing them about now, you'll probably manage to get maybe 3, 4 possibly pickings from them, so 4 waves of them regenerating after you've picked them before it gets too cold and they tire themselves out. So it's definitely worth doing now. You can grow them in pots or troughs. You can carry on afterwards by growing them in the greenhouse or the polytunnel or even on the windowsill at home. We'll probably do a couple of waves over like the late autumn on the window ledge and some really early spring, because they're just delicious and they taste like optimism, particularly in the really early spring when it's like February, early March sort of time. To be able to harvest some pea shoots grown like indoors at that time, it tastes like you're nearly at spring, even if you're a bit of a way off. Sorry, I'm talking about spring already. Yeah, autumn, Jessie, it's autumn first. So I'll be putting some pea shoots just straight in the ground out there and just nipping them off for salads. And chaps, I think that's about all I'm going to be sowing this month. I say all, that's quite a lot, to be fair. But I'm going to be trying to sow them some at the beginning of the month, some at the end, like I say, to spread my net to catch whatever the weather is going to throw at us. Fingers crossed that September is going to be beautiful, beautiful sunny weather. We'll get that like last burst of joy before we have to set in for the winter. And then it's just preparing for next year, isn't it? I've already been like putting my lists together of the varieties that I want to try next year, so I am well excited about that. And don't forget, all the varieties and things that I've mentioned are going to be listed in the video description underneath, and if I have links to where I bought them from, there will be links attached to the list. Right chaps, I'm actually recording this Thursday morning. It's coming out this afternoon. It is now lunchtime. So I'm going to pick a load of veg, I'm going to whiz home, I'm going to have lunch, and then I'm going to edit this and hopefully get it up in time so it's not late. See you on Tuesday, chaps. Oh, I did also forget to say that we're thinking about trying some potatoes in the greenhouse, in bags, see if we get a Christmas harvest. I know it works beautifully for some people every single year. We've never tried it, but this is the year. So you can also get some potatoes in, as long as you're growing them undercover or somewhere really, really sheltered. You can get some potatoes in now for a late harvest, as long as they don't get got by the blight.